this map right here, the blue line you see running across, that's the old Erie Canal. Of course, that's very important in the story of the Cobblestones. This is a map, not all the Cobblestones are on it, but this is a map that some GIS students at MCC helped me with. Those buildings you see there that are kind of gold color, they're made of fieldstones. Those that are blue are lake wash stones, and you can see most of them are north of the Erie Canal. And where they're in the blue, that's old Lake Iroquois. So many of the buildings around in this part of Monroe County are made of lake stones. Others a little farther south are mostly field stones. Generally speaking, there's kind of a divide with the canal. There are many exceptions to the rule, though. It's not a perfect example. But generally speaking, that is the case. Next. The Erie Canal, as I mentioned, is very, very important. In 1825, the canal was finished. We're very close to the bicentennial of the canal. This is DeWitt Clinton, no relation to Bill or Hillary. And here he is on the boat called the Seneca Chief, which they took all the way from Buffalo to Albany, and then they got towed by a steamboat down the Hudson to New York City. And here he is pouring Lake Erie water into the Atlantic Ocean, the wedding of the waters. A big, big celebration, and I think it's going to be recommemorated in 2 years. Probably Hilton and other towns around here will certainly have a role in it. Now, it's important to remember that the glaciers, they set the scene that makes the Erie Canal possible. In the Hudson Valley, for example, you find formations there of these giant potholes. Remember the Lake Iroquois did not flow out to St. Lawrence, but it went into the Mohawk Valley? The water was much deeper then, and it was able to make these deep potholes. And what that did was it made a route possible without having to build 2,000 locks. And the original Erie Canal had 83, the modern canal today has 35. So it is doable. And they were able to build this canal. Other states tried to copy us, and they ran into mountains. Our geology, affected by glaciers, allowed us to do this. Next, we got to move along. I know I was told that you people fall asleep after half an hour. Okay, let's talk about masonry. Of course, here's the stones up on Lake Ontario, and they would collect them up there. Oftentimes the question was about schools and churches. A lot of them are built, and it would have been like a Sunday after church activity. The group would get together with their wagons, go up to the lake, collect stones, and bring them back. And they could build from that. Of course, masons were necessary, although many times farmers learned how to do this themselves. In those days, you had to be able to do stuff like that. And they built them out of mixtures of limestone crushed up and heated up in kilns, sand, and water. That's known as quicklime. And they would lay them out in courses, usually about 3 or 4 a day. And it's a very slow process. So it's not like the Amish raising up a barn in 12 hours or less. This takes a couple months, if you have cooperating weather. But they're very long lasting. Some, again, I said are almost 2 centuries long. This is a kiln. I don't know of any around here that are still standing, but there used to be about a couple dozen at least in western New York. And they made the mortar in there. And I don't want to get into too much of the details, but they put alternating layers of limestone and coal. Around here, probably more likely charcoal. And they'd alternate them, and then they would start a fire down below, and the heat would build up, and eventually it would break down the limestone and turn it from calcium carbonate to calcium oxide. And that's what we call quicklime. When put in water, like you see in the middle picture right there, it will absorb the water and change it and not the water, it'll change the quicklime and change it chemically to calcium hydroxide, CaOH2, for those of you who know chemistry. And that is the mortar. They would mix it with sand and get the right consistency, and then it would be put on the building. Many people ask me, the Erie Canal, when the Masons were they out of work after that and then they decided to build these houses? For the most part, the answer is no. One of the reasons is that most of the canal locks did not have any mortar in them. So they didn't know how to do that stuff. They just knew how to do laying stones and cutting them right. Still a very skillful thing they had to be able to do, but it's a different kind of masonry than the cobblestones are. And after our canal opened, other states wanted canals too, so they just went west and built canals in Ohio and Illinois. So they were not out of work. The tools that you use to build cobblestones, as you can see in the upper right-hand slide there, they're kind of diamond-shaped, and they are specially designed to be able to maneuver that mortar so you get nice, clean joints between the rows. This is a picture of somebody who specializes in repairing cobblestones. He, in his case, uses a stick. And you can see that the mortar he's using is actually different than the mortar originally. It's probably Portland cement, and you can always tell a repaired building because the mortar doesn't match very well. Farmers, generally speaking, were involved in building their own homes. Now, ask a question over here from earlier. This is a building that's falling apart in Williamson, out in Wayne County, on the other side of Rochester. Beautiful building, probably in its heyday, but it's been abandoned, and you can see the nice stone wall on the left. That's a veneer, but behind it, it's more irregular shaped stones kind of slapped together with mortar, and they kind of support the stones in the front. When you get to the late period, around 1850 or so, the interior, they weren't even connected, they were actually separate. These tend to be very, very sturdy, except if they're left abandoned, and then they start decaying from the inside, when the windows get smashed and rain and snow gets inside. Okay. Now I mentioned earlier the different architectures. This is what we call a federal style. It doesn't have to be made out of cobblestone. It's a very simple veneer, very plain, and very common after the Revolution. It's post-colonial or federal style. A lot of houses in Boston and Philadelphia look like this. And up here, we built them with cobblestones, but it's the same kind of structure. This is Elfrance Alley in Philadelphia, not too far away from the Liberty Bell, the oldest street in America, and these are all federal buildings. And here's a good example of a cobblestone building that's federal in style. Remember, cobblestone is a kind of a structure, a building method, whereas federal is a kind of a style. You don't see any pillars, you don't see fancy cornices on the roofs, pretty plain, but in its own starkness, I find these buildings to be pretty attractive. Next. Here's another example. This is actually, I think it's right on the county line between here and Orleans County, closer to Hamlin, in that area. I forget the name of the building now. And this one is an important one because it's the only one left in Rochester, the city. It's on Culver Road, and you can see it's abandoned, but I just read an article on the DNC website the other day that there is a group that has been raising money, and they are going to take over this building and somehow rehab it. The outside's okay, it's the inside that's a mess. But they need to take care of that. The Greek revival comes a little bit later, in the late 1830s, and the Greek revival, you can usually detect that, even though it's not a cobblestone, by these very elaborate columns, the Greek style. And here's one, the Babcock House out in Niagara County, which is a museum on Route 18. And you can see the Doric column there. Real quickly, a couple others. This building on the upper left is the Starbucks building in Victor. The one below it is in Wayne County. I think that's in Williamson, excuse me. And that one is has all the columns and fancy roofs and porches, but it also has stones that are all exactly the same, made of red sandstone. Next. And I thought I'd point out a couple in this part of the county, and they are as follows. You could just get the next thing here. The Johnson Birchfield, which is in Hamlin. The Husserl House, which is here in Parma. Also in Hamlin, the Williams Bower home. This is another one of those homes that's kind of like a herringbone, except that they're not tilted. They're pretty horizontal. And that's the Parma schoolhouse that you said is a dry cleaners now. And I know one in Webster, well, it was an auto shop at one time, but today it's the Cobblestone on Main. It is kind of a bistro. And the bottom one is the Isaac Chase, and that's here in Parma, but real close to the town line with Greece. This house was involved, we know, in the Underground Railroad. And probably a couple others were as well. Most of them did not publicize the fact because they were breaking the law. Next. I think I'm pretty much done. I'd be glad to take any questions. And I think, yeah, we did pretty good in time here. So if anybody does have any questions, I'll try to answer them. Try to speak as loud as you can, but if you can't, I'll repeat the question. Yes, sir.
Is there anybody today that still makes the limestone mortar?
I know of a guy, I wish I could remember his name now, who repairs them, and he tries to use the traditional way of doing it. The problem is the limestone's got to be heated up in a kiln, and I don't know where you do that now. So it's a little hard to get it. But I'm sure if you were imaginative, you could probably make that. But it's a very tedious process that most people don't want to spend time on. Yes?
I heard a recipe of where you could use mortar mix and lime and 4 parts of sand.
That sounds about right.
Repairing cobblestone, but you can't get the mortar mix, or I mean the limestone as you did, but you can still get lime.
Yes.
And they said that. I saw a house up on the Ridge Road, somewhere beyond Childs, where a lot of the cobblestone had fallen off the front.
Yeah.
And about 2 or 3 years later, I went by and it's all been repaired.
Yeah.
You know the house
I believe I know which one you're talking about.
It's got 2 wings.
It's in Gaines, I think, which is just past Charles. Yeah, that is quite remarkable because in many cases when it happens like that, they'll put some other veneer over it because it's tedious. On the other hand, a lot of these houses are on the National Register of Historic Houses. So you can get funding to do those kinds of things.
We have 10 cobblestones left in the town of Parma. We had 15 at one time.
Yeah.
5 have been demolished, but
Yeah.
there's still 10. And
Yeah.
we'd like to get those on the register.
Oh, definitely. They're gems. You know, we don't want to lose them. They're part of our history. Anybody else?
I still want to know, on the inside, what is the wall like so that would adhere?
It's basically just a regular stone wall, but they use the pieces of rock, they kind of put them down, not being too particular about how flat they were, and then they would kind of slap the mortar in there. We call that a rubble wall.
Right,
And
so
then they would, on the inside, they would probably panel it with something with wood or plasterboard or whatever, depending on when they were building it. So you wouldn't actually see the wall.
Right.
If you go to the Cobblestone Museum in Childs, they have a place, I think it's in the big building, which is the church there, the old Universalist church. And as you walk in, the guide will point it out to you, that they have a piece where you can see where the rubble wall is there. But most of the time, they didn't want people to see it. It's like you don't want to see your fiberglass, you know, insulation in your house. It's got to be covered up with something else. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what's going on with the cobblestone and grease on Ridge Road that has all them spray paint on it?
No, I don't. Anybody know?
It's abandoned.
Yeah.
It's the old cat camp, and it's on the north side of the road. It's the first house west of the Genesee, first cobblestone.
Okay.
On the ridge west of the
Yeah.
Genesee.
I believe that, yeah. Unfortunately, when the buildings are abandoned, that's when the trouble starts. You get the vandalism, the windows get smashed, you get graffiti on it. Hopefully, somebody will take over that thing and maybe try to bring it back.
That's one
But
of
you never know.
the car dealer owns or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably in New York State, about 900 buildings, cobblestone buildings were built. And about a little over 600, I believe, still remain today. So that's a pretty good percentage, considering, you know, they're, again, anywhere between 160 and 190 years old. Yes?
We've been to the museum in Gaines and Childs.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I thought was absolutely amazing was 2 houses down from the church is a one-room schoolhouse. And when you go in there, the floor goes up so the kids can sit up here and see over the heads of the kids below them.
Yes, and more importantly, the teacher can see
Yes.
that. Of course, those days, kids of all ages were there. What's really cool about that house, well, I don't think that they have the same desks that were used in the school itself, but they're from the same period. But I mean, if they put you, sit you there like you're in school, the old inkwells,
Yes.
they're cool. And they do a nice tour there if you go. Definitely worth going to it if you haven't been there. They have other buildings too that are not cobblestones, but they are very interesting. A blacksmith house, a blacksmith shop, a print shop, and then like a little mini museum showing different agricultural tools, including a butter churn that was run by a dog on a treadmill. So, very clever. Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Yes,
I
thank you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you a lot. We have one more duty for you. We have a 50-50 drawing, and as our guest, we asked you to pull out the winner. We have $26.
Okay. I'm going to make somebody happy and some people aren't. Okay. Okay.
Read out the last 3 digits, I think.
The last 3 digits are 046.
046.
Right here.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Please stay around for some socializing. We have some cookies and Friday